On the morning of April 19th, 1995, an ex-army soldier and security guard named Timothy McVeigh parked a rented Ryder truck in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. He was about to commit mass murder. Inside the vehicle was a powerful bomb made out of a deadly cocktail of agricultural fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other chemicals. McVeigh got out, locked the door, and headed towards his getaway car. He ignited one timed fuse, then another. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the bomb exploded. Within moments, the surrounding area looked like a war zone. A third of the building had been reduced to rubble, with many floors flattened. Dozens of cars were incinerated, and more than 300 nearby buildings were damaged or destroyed. The human toll was still more devastating. Hundreds were dead, including 19 children, with several hundred more injured. It was, and still remains, the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. Our episodes deal with serious and often distressing incidents. If at any time you feel like you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. This episode discusses mass murder, which included children, and domestic terrorism involving bombing. It may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Timothy James McVeigh was born on April 23, 1968, in Lockport, New York, the only son and the second of three children of his Irish-American parents, Noreen Mildred Hill and William McVeigh. In 1866, McVeigh's great-great-grandfather, Edward McVeigh, emigrated from Ireland and settled in Niagara County. After McVeigh's parents divorced when he was 10 years old, he was raised by his father in Pendleton, New York. McVeigh claimed to have been a target of bullying at school, and he took refuge in a fantasy world where he imagined retaliating against the bullies. At the end of his life, he stated his belief that the United States government was the ultimate bully. Most who knew McVeigh remember him as being very shy and withdrawn, while a few described him as an outgoing and playful child who withdrew as an adolescent. He is said to have had only one girlfriend as an adolescent. He later told journalists that he did not have any idea how to impress girls. While in high school, McVeigh became interested in computers and hacked into government computer systems on his Commodore 64 under the handle The Wanderer, taken from the song by Dion DiMucci. In his senior year, he was named Most Promising Computer Programmer of Starpoint Central High School, as well as Most Talkative by his classmates, as a joke, as he did not speak much. He had relatively poor grades until his 1986 graduation. In May 1988, at the age of 20, McVeigh enlisted in the United States Army and attended basic training and advanced individual training at the US Army Infantry School at Fort Benning in Georgia. While in the military, McVeigh used much of his spare time to read about firearms, sniper tactics, and explosives. His future co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, was his platoon guide. McVeigh and Nichols shared a white supremacist and anti-government view. McVeigh was reprimanded by the military for purchasing a white power t-shirt at a Ku Klux Klan rally where they were objecting to black servicemen who wore black power t-shirts around a military installation. He and Nichols quickly got along with their similar backgrounds as well as their views in gun collecting and survivalism. The two were later stationed together at Fort Riley in Junction City, Kansas, where they met and became friends with their future accomplice, Michael Fortier. McVeigh and Nichols expressed anger at the federal government's handling of the 1992 FBI standoff with Randy Weaver at Ruby Ridge. as well as the Waco siege, a 51-day standoff in 1993 between the FBI and Branch Davidian members that began with a botched attempt to execute a search warrant. There was a firefight and ultimately a siege of the compound, resulting in the burning and shooting deaths of David Koresh and 75 others. In March 1993, McVeigh visited the Waco site during the standoff and again after the siege ended. He later decided to bomb a federal building as a response to the raids and to protest what he believed to be US government efforts to restrict rights of private citizens, in particular those under the Second Amendment. McVeigh believed that federal agents were acting like soldiers, thus making an attack on a federal building an attack on their command centres. McVeigh later said that instead of attacking a building, he had contemplated assassinating Attorney General Janet Reno, as well as FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi, who had become infamous among extremists because of his participation in the Ruby Ridge and Waco sieges. McVeigh claimed that he sometimes regretted not carrying out an assassination campaign. He initially intended to destroy only a federal building, but he later decided that his message would be more powerful if many people were killed in the bombing. McVeigh's criterion for attack sites was that the target should house at least two of these three federal law enforcement agencies: the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, ATF, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. He regarded the presence of additional law enforcement agencies, such as the Secret Service or the US Marshal Service, as a bonus. A resident of Kingman, Arizona, McVeigh considered targets in Missouri, Arizona, Texas, and Arkansas. He said in his authorized biography that he wanted to minimize non-governmental casualties, so he ruled out Simmons Tower, a 40-story building in Little Rock, Arkansas, because a florist shop occupied space on the ground floor. In December 1994, McVeigh and Fortier visited Oklahoma City to inspect what would become the target of their campaign, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The 9-story building, built in 1977, was named for a federal judge and housed 14 federal agencies, including the DEA, ATF, Social Security Administration, and recruiting offices for the Army and Marine Corps. McVeigh chose the Murrah building because he expected its glass front to shatter under the impact of the blast. He also believed that its adjacent large open parking lot across the street might absorb and dissipate some of the force and protect the occupants of nearby non-federal buildings. In addition, McVeigh believed that the open space around the building would provide better photo opportunities for propaganda purposes. He planned the attack for April 19, 1995, to coincide with not only the second anniversary of the Waco siege, but also the 220th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord during the American Revolution. McVeigh and Nichols purchased or stole the materials they needed to manufacture the bomb and stored them in rented sheds. In August 1994, McVeigh obtained 9 binary explosive kinesticks from gun collector Roger E. Moore, and with Nichols, ignited the devices outside Nichols' home in Harrington, Kansas. On September 30th, 1994, Nichols bought 40 50-pound bags of ammonium nitrate fertilizer from Mid-Kansas Coop in McPherson, Kansas. Enough to fertilize 12.5 acres of farmland at a rate of 160 pounds of nitrogen per acre, an amount commonly used for corn. Nichols bought an additional 50-pound bag on October 18th, 1994. McVeigh approached Michael Fortier and asked him to assist with the bombing project, but he refused. In October 1994, McVeigh showed Michael and his wife, Lori Fortier, a diagram he had drawn of the bomb he wanted to build. McVeigh planned to construct a bomb containing more than 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer mixed with about 1,200 pounds of liquid nitromethane and 350 pounds of Tovex. Including the weight of the 1655 US gallon drums in which the explosive mixture was to be packed, the bomb would have a combined weight of about 7,000 pounds. McVeigh originally intended to use hydrazine rocket fuel, but it proved too expensive and too difficult to acquire. McVeigh and his accomplices then attempted to purchase 55 US gallon drums of nitromethane at various drag racing series events during the season, but due to his suspicious behaviour, was refused. On April 14, 1995, McVeigh paid for a motel room at the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, Kansas. The next day, he rented a 1993 Ford F700 truck from Ryder under the name Robert D. Kling, an alias he adopted because he knew an army soldier named Kling with whom he shared physical characteristics, and because it reminded him of the Klingon warriors of Star Trek. On April 16, 1995, McVeigh and Nichols drove to Oklahoma City, where he parked a getaway car, a yellow 1977 Mercury Marquis, several blocks from the Murrah Federal Building. The nearby Regency Towers apartment's lobby security camera recorded images of Nichols' blue 1984 GMC pickup truck on April 16th. After removing the car's license plate, he left a note covering the vehicle identification number that read, "Not abandoned. Please do not tow. Will move by April 23. Needs battery and cable." Both men then returned to Kansas. On April 17th and 18th, 1995, McVeigh and Nichols removed the bomb supplies from the storage unit they had rented in Harrington, Kansas, where Nichols lived, and loaded them into the Ryder rental truck. They then drove to Geary Lake State Park, where they nailed boards onto the floor of the truck to hold the 13 barrels in place, and mixed the chemicals using plastic buckets and a bathroom scale. Each filled barrel weighed nearly 500 pounds. McVeigh added more explosives to the driver's side of the cargo bay, which he could ignite, killing himself in the process, at close range with his Glock 21 pistol in case the primary fuses failed. During McVeigh's trial, Laurie Fortier stated that McVeigh claimed to have arranged the barrels in order to form a shaped charge. This was achieved by tamping the aluminium side panel of the truck with bags of ammonium nitrate fertilizer to direct the blast laterally towards the building. Specifically, McVeigh arranged the barrels in the shape of a backwards J. He later said that for pure destructive power, he would have put the barrels on the side of the cargo bay closest to the Murrah building. However, such an unevenly distributed 7,000-pound load might have broken an axle, flipped the truck over, or at least caused it to lean to one side, which could have drawn attention. All or most of the barrels contained metal cylinders of acetylene intended to increase the fireball and the brisance of the explosion. McVeigh then added a dual fuse ignition system accessible from the truck's front cab. He drilled 2 holes in the cab of the truck under the seat, while 2 holes were also drilled in the body of the truck. 1 green cannon fuse was run through each hole into the cab. These time-delayed fuses led from the cab through plastic fish tank tubing conduit to 2 sets of non-electric blasting caps, which would ignite around 350 pounds of the high-grade explosives that McVeigh stole from a rock quarry. The tubing was painted yellow to blend in with the truck's livery and duct taped in place to the wall to make it harder to disable by yanking from the outside. The fuses were set up to initiate, through shock tubes, the 350 pounds of Tovex Blast-Right gel sausages, which would in turn set off the configuration of barrels. Of the 13 filled barrels, 9 contained ammonium nitrate and nitromethane, and 4 contained a mixture of the fertilizer and about 4 US gallons of diesel fuel. Additional materials and tools used for manufacturing the bomb were left in the truck to be destroyed in the blast. After finishing the truck bomb, the two men separated. Nichols returned home to Harrington, and McVeigh travelled with the truck to Junction City. The bomb cost about $5,000 to make, equivalent to about $10,000 in 2022's money. McVeigh's original plan had been to detonate the bomb at 11 a.m, but at dawn on April 19, 1995, he decided instead to destroy the building at 9 a.m. As he drove toward the Murrah Federal Building in the Ryder truck, McVeigh carried with him an envelope containing pages from the Turner Diaries, a fictional account of white supremacists who ignite a revolution by blowing up the FBI headquarters at 9:15 one morning using a truck bomb. McVeigh wore a printed t-shirt with Sic Semper Tyrannis, which translates to "Thus always to tyrants." He also carried an envelope full of revolutionary materials that included a bumper sticker with the slogan, falsely attributed to Thomas Jefferson: "When the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny." Underneath, McVeigh had written, "Maybe now there will be liberty," with a hand-copied quote by John Locke asserting that a man has a right to kill someone who takes away his liberty. McVeigh entered Oklahoma City at 8:50 a.m. At 8:57 a.m, the Regency Towers Apartments lobby security camera that had recorded Nichols' pickup truck 3 days earlier recorded the Ryder truck heading towards the Murrah Federal Building. At the same moment, McVeigh lit the 5-minute fuse. 3 minutes later, still a block away, he lit the 2-minute fuse. He parked the Ryder truck in a drop-off zone situated under the building's daycare centre, exited and locked the truck. As he headed to his getaway vehicle, he dropped the keys to the truck a few blocks away. At exactly 9:02 a.m, the Ryder truck, containing over 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, nitromethane, and diesel fuel mixture, detonated in front of the north side of the 9-story Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. 168 people were killed almost instantly, and hundreds more injured. 1/3 of the building was destroyed by the explosion, which created a 30-foot wide, 8-foot deep crater on northwest 5th Street next to the building. The blast destroyed or damaged 324 buildings within a 4-block radius and shattered glass in 258 nearby buildings. The broken glass alone accounted for 5% of the death toll and 69% of the injuries outside the Murrah Federal Building. The blast destroyed or burned 86 cars around the site. The destruction of the buildings left several hundred people homeless and shut down a number of offices in downtown Oklahoma City. The explosion was estimated to have caused at least $652 million worth of damage. The effects of the blast were equivalent to over 5,000 pounds of TNT and could be heard and felt up to 55 miles away. Seismometers at the Omniplex Science Museum in Oklahoma City, 4.3 miles away, and in Norman, Oklahoma, 16.1 miles away, recorded the blast as measuring approximately 3 on the Richter magnitude scale. The collapse of the northern half of the building took roughly 7 seconds. As the truck exploded, it first destroyed the column next to it, designated as G20, and shattered the entire glass facade of the building. The shockwave of the explosion forced the lower floors upwards before the 4th and 5th floors collapsed onto the 3rd floor, which housed the transfer beam that ran the length of the building and was being supported by 4 pillars below, as well as supporting the pillars that hold the upper floors. The added weight meant that the 3rd floor gave way along with the transfer beam, which in turn caused the collapse of the building. Initially, the FBI had three hypotheses about responsibility for the bombing. International terrorists, possibly the same group that had carried out the World Trade Center bombing. A drug cartel carrying out an act of vengeance against DEA agents in the building's DEA office. And anti-government radicals attempting to start a rebellion against the federal government. An estimated 643 people were inside the building when the bomb exploded. By the end of the day, 14 adults and 6 children were confirmed dead, and over 100 injured. The toll eventually reached 168 confirmed dead, not including an unmatched left leg that could have belonged to an unidentified 169th victim. Most of the deaths resulted from the collapse of the building, rather than the bomb blast itself. Those killed included 163 who were in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, and 1 person in the Athenian Building, 1 woman in a parking lot across the street, a man and woman in the Oklahoma Water Resources Building, and a rescue worker struck on the head by debris. The victims also included 19 children, of whom 15 were in the America's Kids Daycare Center. The bodies of the 168 victims were identified at a temporary morgue set up at the scene. A team of 24 identified the victims using full-body X-rays, dental examinations, fingerprinting, blood tests, and DNA testing. More than 680 people were injured. The majority of the injuries were abrasions, severe burns, and bone fractures. The victims ranged in age from 3 months to 73 years and included 3 pregnant women. McVeigh later acknowledged the casualties, saying, "I didn't define the rules of engagement in this conflict. The rules, if not written down, are defined by the aggressor. It was brutal, no holds barred. Women and kids were killed at Waco and Ruby Ridge. You put back in the government's faces exactly what they're giving out." He later stated, "I wanted the government to hurt like the people of Waco and Ruby Ridge had." McVeigh was arrested within 90 minutes of the explosion. As he was traveling north on Interstate 35 near Perry in Noble County, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger stopped McVeigh for driving his yellow 1977 vehicle without a license plate and arrested him for having a concealed weapon. For his home address, McVeigh falsely claimed he resided at Terry Nichols' brother's house in Michigan. After booking McVeigh into jail, Trooper Hanger searched his patrol car and found a business card which had been concealed by McVeigh after being handcuffed. Written on the back of the card, which was from a Wisconsin military surplus store, were the words, "TNT at $5 a stick. Need more." The card was later used as evidence during McVeigh's trial. While investigating the VIN on an axle of the truck used in the explosion and the remnants of the license plate, federal agents were able to link the truck to a specific Ryder rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. Using a sketch created with the assistance of Eldon Elliott, owner of the agency, the agents were able to implicate McVeigh in the bombing. McVeigh was also identified by Leah McGowan of the Dreamland Motel, who remembered him parking a large yellow Ryder truck in the lot. McVeigh had signed in under his real name at the motel, using an address that matched the one on his forged license and the charge sheet at the Perry police station. Before signing his real name at the motel, McVeigh had used false names for his transactions. However, Leah McGowan said, "People are so used to signing their own name that when they go to sign a phony name, they almost always go to write and then look up for a moment as if to remember the new name they want to use. This is what McVeigh did, and when he looked up, I started talking to him and it threw him off." After an April 21st, 1995 court hearing on the gun charges, but before McVeigh's release, federal agents took him into custody as they continued their investigation into the bombing. Rather than talk to investigators about the bombing, McVeigh demanded an attorney. Having been tipped off by the arrival of police and helicopters that a bombing suspect was inside, a restless crowd began to gather outside the jail. While McVeigh's requests for a bulletproof vest or transport by helicopter were denied, authorities did use a helicopter to transport him from Perry to Oklahoma City. Federal agents obtained a warrant to search the house of McVeigh's father, Bill, after which they broke down the door and wired the house and telephone with listening devices. FBI investigators used the resulting information gained, along with the fake address McVeigh had been using, to begin their search for the Nichols brothers, Terry and James. On April 21, 1995, Terry Nichols learned that he was being hunted and turned himself in. Investigators discovered incriminating evidence at his home: ammonium nitrate and blasting caps, the electric drill used to drill out the locks at the quarry, books on bomb making, a copy of Hunter, a 1989 novel by William Luther Pierce, the founder and chairman of the National Alliance, a white nationalist group, and a hand-drawn map of downtown Oklahoma City, on which the Murrah Building and the spot where McVeigh's getaway car was hidden were marked. After a 9-hour interrogation, Terry Nichols was formally held in federal custody until his trial. On April 25, 1995, James Nichols was also arrested, but he was released after 32 days due to lack of evidence. McVeigh's sister Jennifer was also accused of illegally mailing ammunition to McVeigh, but she was granted immunity in exchange for testifying against him. A Jordanian-American man travelling from his home in Oklahoma City to visit family in Jordan on April 19, 1995, was detained and questioned by the FBI at the airport. Several Arab American groups criticised the FBI for racial profiling and the subsequent media coverage for publicising the man's name. Attorney General Reno denied claims that the federal government relied on racial profiling, whilst FBI Director Louis J. Freer told a press conference that the man was never a suspect and was instead treated as a witness to the Oklahoma City bombing, who assisted the government's investigation. On August 10, 1995, McVeigh was indicted on 11 federal counts, including conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, destruction with the use of explosives, and 8 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of law enforcement officers. McVeigh instructed his lawyers to use a necessity defense. Defendants seeking to rely on this defense argue that they should not be held liable for their actions as a crime because their conduct was necessary to prevent some greater harm. McVeigh's lawyers ended up not doing so, as they would have to prove that McVeigh was in imminent danger from the government. McVeigh argued that imminent danger did not necessarily mean immediate. They would have argued that his bombing of the Murrah Building was a justifiable response to what McVeigh believed were the crimes of the US government at Waco, Texas, where the 51-day siege of the Branch Davidian complex resulted in the deaths of 76 people. On June 2, 1997, McVeigh was found guilty on all 11 counts of the federal indictment. Although 168 people, including 19 children, were killed in the April 19th bombing, murder charges were brought against McVeigh for only the 8 federal agents who were on duty when the bomb destroyed much of the building. Along with the 8 counts of murder, McVeigh was charged with conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and destroying a federal building. Oklahoma City District Attorney Bob Macy said he would file state charges in the other 160 murders after McVeigh's co-defendant Terry Nichols was tried. On June 13th, the jury recommended that McVeigh receive the death penalty. The US Department of Justice brought federal charges against McVeigh for causing the deaths of 8 federal officers, leading to a possible death penalty. They could not, however, bring charges against McVeigh for the remaining 160 deaths in federal court because those deaths fell under the jurisdiction of the state of Oklahoma. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to death. Because McVeigh was convicted and sentenced to death, the state of Oklahoma did not file murder charges against McVeigh for the other 160 deaths. McVeigh's death sentence was delayed pending an appeal. One of his appeals was for certiorari, which is a Latin translation meaning to be made more certain, was taken to the Supreme Court of the United States and denied on March 8, 1999. McVeigh's request for a nationally televised execution was also denied. Entertainment Network Incorporated, an internet company that produces adult-themed websites, unsuccessfully sued for the right to broadcast the execution. The day before his execution, McVeigh said in a letter to the Buffalo News, "I am sorry these people had to lose their lives, but that's the nature of the beast. It's understood going in what the human toll will be." He said that if there turned out to be an afterlife, he would improvise, adapt, and overcome, noting, "If there is a hell, then I'll be in good company with a lot of fighter pilots who also had to bomb innocents to win the war." He also said, "I knew I wanted this before it happened. I knew my objective was state-assisted suicide, and when it happens, it's in your face." The Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, transferred McVeigh from USP Florence Admax to the federal death row at USP in Terre Haute, Indiana, in 1999. McVeigh dropped his remaining appeals, saying that he would rather die than spend the rest of his life in prison. On January 16, 2001, the BOP set May 16th as McVeigh's execution date. McVeigh said that his only regret was not completely destroying the federal building. 6 days prior to his scheduled execution, the FBI turned over thousands of documents of evidence it had previously withheld to McVeigh's attorneys. As a result, US Attorney General John Ashcroft announced McVeigh's execution would be stayed for 1 month. The execution date was reset for June 11th. McVeigh invited conductor David Woodard to perform Requiem Mass music on the eve of his execution. While acknowledging McVeigh's horrible deed, Woodard consented, intending to provide comfort. McVeigh also requested a Catholic chaplain. His last meal consisted of 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at 7:14 a.m. on June 11, 2001, the first federal prisoner to be executed since March 15, 1963. Former Army soldier and friend of Nichols, Michael Fortier, testified against both McVeigh and Nichols. Fortier had entered into a federal plea agreement for reduced charges and immunity for his wife in return for his agreement to testify. He was charged with failing to notify authorities in advance of the crime and sentenced to 12 years in prison. Fortier testified that Nichols and McVeigh had expressed anti-government feelings and conspired to blow up the Murrah Federal Building. He said he helped McVeigh survey the building before the attack. He also testified that Nichols had robbed an Arkansas gun dealer to finance the cost of the bombing. Fortier provided solid bricks of evidence for the cases against McVeigh and Nichols, according to the prosecutor. On January 20th, 2006, Fortier was released for good behaviour into the Witness Protection Program and given a new identity. Nichols' wife, Murrah, testified as a defence witness, but her story may have helped the prosecution's case. She said her husband had been living a double life prior to the bombing, using aliases renting storage lockers and lying that he'd broken off his relationship with McVeigh. She also testified that Nichols travelled to Oklahoma City 3 days before the bombing, supporting the prosecution's contention that Nichols helped McVeigh station a getaway car near the Murrah Building. Murrah also failed to give Nichols an alibi for April 18, 1995, the day the prosecution said Nichols helped McVeigh assemble the truck bomb. Nichols was represented by criminal defence attorney Michael Tiger. The trial lasted 9 weeks, with the prosecution calling 100 witnesses tying Nichols to McVeigh and the bombing plot. The prosecution argued that Nichols helped McVeigh purchase and steal bomb ingredients, park the getaway car near the Murrah Building, and assemble the bomb. The defence attempted to cast doubt on the case against Nichols by calling witnesses who said they saw other men with McVeigh before the bombing, and by claiming the government had manipulated the evidence against Nichols. The jury deliberated for 41 hours over a period of 6 days, acquitting Nichols on December 24, 1997 of actually detonating the bomb, but convicting him of conspiring with McVeigh to use a weapon of mass destruction, a capital offence. They acquitted Nichols on the charges of first-degree premeditated murder, but convicted him on the lesser charge of involuntary, unintentional manslaughter in the deaths of the federal law enforcement officers. After the penalty hearing concluded, the jury deliberated for 13 hours over 2 days on whether to give Nichols a death sentence, but this was deadlocked. US District Court Judge Richard P. Matz then had the option of giving Nichols a sentence of life imprisonment or a lesser term. On June 4, 1998, he sentenced Nichols to life in prison without parole on the conspiracy conviction, calling Nichols an enemy of the Constitution, who had conspired to destroy everything the Constitution protects. Nichols also received a concurrent 48-year sentence for his 8 involuntary manslaughter convictions, 6 for each victim. Nichols appeared to show no emotion. He was sent to the federal Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. On February 26, 1999, a federal appeals court affirmed Nichols' conviction and sentence. The bombing itself was quickly solved, but the investigation turned out to be one of the most exhaustive in FBI history. No stone was left unturned to make sure every clue was found and all the culprits identified. By the time it was over, the Bureau had conducted more than 28,000 interviews, followed some 43,000 investigative leads, amassed 3.5 tons of evidence, searched more than 13.2 million hotel records, reviewed more than 3.1 million truck rental records, searched more than 682,000 airline reservation records, and reviewed nearly 1 billion pieces of information. In the end, the government that McVeigh hated and hoped to topple swiftly captured him and convincingly convicted both him and his co-conspirators. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shadow Crimes. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow or subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media and check out our website at shadowcrimes.com, where mysteries thrive and shadows speak.